Hello, welcome to the channel. This is what if Deku was immortal. Hope you enjoy. Izuku Midoriya was 5 when he died for the first time. The first time, mind you. Because it sure as hell wouldn't be the last. His mother was standing outside their apartment talking to Mitsuki after Midoriya's dentist appointment. He wasn't paying much attention. But Koku wasn't with her today, and besides, he hadn't been very nice ever since he had gotten his quirk and Midoriya hadn't. Instead of listening to his mother talk, he decided to play with the red bouncy ball he had gotten from the dental office. Midoriya would throw it as hard as he could against the sidewalk and then fumble to catch it as it fell back down. He did this over and over and over again. It was just entertaining enough to keep his focus. This time, he was trying to see if he could bounce it higher than the sapling in front of the building. He wound up getting ready to throw it, and with an internal Delaware smash he chucked it down with all his might. The ball soared up, higher than even the tree. Midoriya grinned until he realized that the ball's trajectory had it now heading to the street. His eyes widened as he ran to the curb, determined to grab the ball back. As it rolled across the street, he chased after it, his only thought being that his mother would be so mad if he lost his new toy. She wouldn't be, of course. I have no idea why he thought that. But in his defense, he was only 5. The ball was only a few feet away. Izuku could almost reach it. He crouched down, hand outstretched, and splat! He didn't feel any pain, only a slight tingle across his whole body as he watched red leak out of his limp body. That probably shouldn't be happening, he thought. Then everything went black. And then he opened his eyes. It was a bit disorienting, to be honest. The last thing he remembered was a car and someone screaming. Had it been him? He couldn't remember. For the record, it was his mother. Don't blame her though, she had just watched her son get run over and die after all. And then his mother was clutching his face sobbing, and there was the car and Bakugo's mother and his red ball in the gutter across the street, and he thought that he remembered red, but he couldn't see any blood. And you're alive? It was his quirk. After a huge mess and lots of tears and a very strange conversation with the man who had been driving, Inko drove him to see a specialist across the city. This was probably because the pediatrician they had seen a year prior was clearly incompetent. And also a bit of a jerk. Who just outright crushes a kid's dream like that? But I digress. Could you perhaps elaborate a bit on how Izuku looked right after the incident? Inko sat up straighter and sniffled a bit. He wasn't moving, and so we rushed over and dashed. She sniffled again. There was blood everywhere, but when I got closer I realized that it was, well, shimmery. Shimmery? Inko nodded. As I watched, it started to turn kinda gold-colored. And then, it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes at the most, it started to almost flow back towards Izuku. It kinda collected on him, coating him. She paused and took a breath. And then it turned into this, like gold dust? I want to say it looked almost like glitter. The doctor nodded, scribbling vigorously into his notebook. This was because the doctor was fascinated with quirks, and this one was the most interesting one he'd seen yet. Part of him wondered if he could write about this experience on his blog. And after a minute or two, the glitter exploded. And Izuku was fine. The doctor was still writing in his book, but he muttered, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And with a loud clap, he finally closed the notebook. Well, that is most definitely the result of a late-formed quirk. And on top of that, I think this is perhaps the most interesting quirk I have ever heard of. Inko was a little taken aback at the doctor's outgoing response, but she sat up a bit straighter at the mention of a quirk. This is such a rare mutation though, I've never heard of a quirk this interesting. But going by my knowledge of high-powered quirks, I'm nearly positive that there must be another aspect to it. The doctor turned to Izuku, lowering his head. You said that it didn't hurt, huh? His voice had taken on a lighter tone while speaking to the child. Midoriya shook his head vigorously, clucking a red bouncy ball to his chest. Lifting his head, the doctor continued, talking to Inko, that could be it. It's possible that he won't feel any pain for the rest of his life. However, that's not necessarily a good thing. It could mean that he'll have to be very careful with normal activities in order to not harm his body. We feel pain for a reason, and suppressing that can have unwanted consequences. Inko furrowed her eyebrows in response. It should be pretty easy to test though, he said cheerfully before turning to Midoriya again. The doctor then leaned forward and gave him a small pinch on his arm. That hurt at all? Midoriya shook his head. Izuku? I'm going to pinch you again a little harder, but stop me if it starts to hurt, K? Okay, Midoriya said. The doctor took his arm once more and gave a hard pinch. Midoriya didn't even flinch, even when the doctor sat back up and revealed his arm to be red and two distinct marks. Well, that just about proves it. Seems like his nerves have been altered because of his quirk. His brain will no longer register pain. However, feeling pain is crucial in daily life. It tells us to stop touching that hot pan, to not walk on our hurt leg, and such. He'll have to be very careful to not harm himself, and once he does, to be very careful to not injure himself even more. The doctor was energetically scribbling in his notebook as he spoke, but he stopped when he saw Inko, wringing her hands nervously, eyebrows furrowed. It probably won't be that bad. He seems to have a healing aspect to his quirk if this morning was any indication, so we'll just have to wait and see. I have a quirk, Midoriya said tentatively after a moment of silence. You do. And it's a very interesting one, the doctor told him softly. Midoriya tilted his head thoughtfully, and after considering it for a moment his eyes lit up and he jumped to his feet yelling, I'm gonna be a hero. Inko looked like she was about to faint. The next day could be summed up in a list of things broken: 1 bathroom door, 1 blanket, 1 plate, and no less than 12 of Midoriya's bones. Oh, and poor Inko's eyes, if the constant tears meant anything. It had started as Midoriya woke up. Rolling over, he yanked his blanket off and watched as it ripped straight down the middle until he was holding a strip of it in his hand. His sleepy brain took a moment to register what had happened. Maybe I should tell Mom. Standing up, he padded down the hallway, calling to his mother. In the bathroom, Izuku, came the muffled reply. He stood in front of the bathroom door and knocked. Can I come? His voice cut off as he watched his fist connect with the door and then continue straight through until it finally stopped on the other side of the door, a large hole showing his mother as she dropped the mascara wand she had been holding in the sink. I ripped my blanket, Mom, he said, holding the strip of blanket in his opposite hand. There were splinters from the door all along his arm, blood dripping from it onto the towel Inko had given him, and the entire thing felt weird. Midoriya flexed his fingers experimentally and the weirdness intensified. For your information, the arm felt strange because it was broken in 6 different places in 4 different bones, but, what with a new quirk and all, Midoriya hardly realized there was anything wrong with it. Except for the splinters. There were lots of splinters. Which brings me back to my point. Inko was on the phone with the specialist from the day before setting up another appointment as Midoriya sat on the couch looking at his arm. Yes. Okay. We'll be over shortly. Inko hung up and looked up at Midoriya. Oh, sweetie, don't mess with it. Midoriya had taken to absent-mindedly poking at one of the splinters, watching as the wound dripped a bit more. Put the towel back on, dear. He obliged. All right, let's go get you ready. We're going to see the doctor again, Kay? I'm hungry. Inko looked at the clock and sighed. Okay, but you have to hurry, all right? A few minutes. She set a plate in front of Midoriya, who was struggling to hold his chopsticks in his non-dominant hand. Tongue out in concentration, he brought them down to the plate and watched in wonder as they shattered the plate and stuck a centimeter deep in the wood of the table. Letting go of the chopsticks, Midoriya noted his fingers seemed to be responding strangely, twisting in odd directions. Inko, in a strange sense of calm, simply sat next to him and attempted to feed him herself. But as soon as Midoriya closed his mouth, there was a large cracking sound. Inko inhaled sharply as she realized what the sound must be. On second thought, maybe we should just go to the doctor's now. The doctor tapped his chin with a pen. So from what you've told me, and what I can see for myself, he gestured to the boy in front of him who was, even after repeated chiding from his mother, poking at his obviously broken arm. I think it's safe to say his quirk completely and utterly shuts off his pain receptors. But what do we do? I can have him constantly breaking himself. There must be some healing aspect to his quirk, right? Inko pleaded. In fact, Inko was quite positive that there had to be. This was why she took Midoriya to the specialist first instead of going to a traditional doctor. That and the fact that Midoriya didn't seem to be in any pain. I'm sure there is. And I think I have a good idea of how it works. Inko let out a sigh of relief. Oh, thank goodness. How do we activate it? We make his heart stop. There were a few seconds of silence before Inko began to sputter. It took several more moments before she was able to calm herself into a semi-coherent state. Are you saying you want to kill my son? The doctor laughed. No, 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 no. I would never do that. Inko breathed deeply in relief. Without proper precautions. Inko stopped breathing. The doctor walked in a few minutes later with a woman at his shoulder. This is my friend Arai. Her quirk is revival. She can resurrect anyone within 30 minutes of death, but if my theory is correct we shouldn't even need her. Inko made a sound like a choking duck. Is this really necessary? It's important that we find the exact parameters of Izuku's quirk so that we can better know how to control it. This is the safest way to do that. Well, I suppose if it's for his own well-being. Brilliant. I'll get started right away. The doctor then pulled out a 3-inch-long knife and a grin that really shouldn't be on the face of anyone with a weapon in hand talking about killing a child. With that thought, Inko once again started to feel faint. That seems rather violent. You said his blood interacted strangely. I'd like to see it in person. And a gun would make far too much of a mess. This is the best way, believe me. Inko swallowed hard and nodded hesitantly and then watched in horror as the doctor slit her son's throat. The doctor told her she had regained consciousness shortly after Izuku. He also informed her that the blood had turned gold exactly as she had seen the day prior. That was as far as he got before Midoriya ran up to her and flew into her arms chatting excitedly. Mom! He cut me with the big knife and it made my voice sound funny and then it was dark and then it wasn't and look Mom. He held his arm up and then pulled his lips apart to show how each wound had healed. See? The blood is gone and it's not weird. And ma teeth or buter too. That's wonderful, sweetie. Inko exclaimed, feeling a bit overwhelmed. Yup. Seems my hypothesis was right. You see, quirks often have two parts to them, the actual quirk and the safety against them. For example, the pro-hero endeavor. His actual quirk allows him to produce fire and the safety keeps him from burning himself. In the case of Izuku, his quirk is what I would like to dub adrenaline rush. In essence, his body is constantly producing a varied form of adrenaline which does two things. First, it keeps him from feeling any pain, and it also keeps him in a near constant state of hysterical strength, making it hard for him to use anything less than 100% of his body's strength even if it causes him harm. The safety measure would of course be that incredible healing of his. It seems that the healing is only activated once his heart stops and needs his blood to heal itself. After about 5 minutes he comes back completely healed and fine. Inko just blinked. Sorry for rambling. The doctor said shyly. It's just this is really interesting. If you're okay with it, I'd love to have a few more appointments with Izuku to run some tests, free of charge. It would just be a pleasure to see such an interesting quirk in action. Inko nodded. Yeah. Okay, sure. I'll write everything that I found down for you soon. Oh. And before you go, I don't think it would be bad to help his body meet the healing requirements when he gets injured again. It should work just fine and would keep him from being too uncomfortable. In a daze, Inko just continued to nod. Yeah, I can do that. Just kill him. I mean, he'll come back, so it's not really. She trailed off before snapping back to attention. Ah. Well. We'll be on our way then. Of course. Feel free to contact me if there are any changes. As they were leaving the room, Inko spotted the coating of gold glitter on the floor and thought about what the doctor had said. Help his body meet the healing requirements when he gets injured again. When? Not if, but when. Inko sighed. She was going to be sick of the glitter very soon. You have a quirk? Bakugo looked dubiously at Midoriya, who was jumping up and down from excitement. Yeah. I can be super strong like All Might and it doesn't hurt if I'm hit or stuff. Inko and Mitsuki watched the exchange with amusement. Inko had immediately invited her friend over to talk about the recent development of Midoriya's quirk, and they were now seated around the table with mugs of tea in front of them. Bakugo glared a bit at Midoriya before making his opinion known. No, you can't. You're just a quirkless deku. No, I'm not Kaken. I got a quirk now and I can't get hurt. Midoriya stomped as he returned Katsuki's glare. Oh yeah? Bakugo drew back his arm. Does this hurt? The two adults realized what was going to happen only a moment before it did. That moment was still plenty of time for them to yell and move to intercept the children. Katsuki, you better not dash, please don't. Katsuki dashed sadly. There was not enough time to reach the two before Bakugo swung his fist at Midoriya's face. Now, an interesting fact about developing quirks is that they are rather unpredictable. So children in certain circumstances may experience significant changes to their quirk, including, but not limited to, activating said quirk unintentionally, going past previously thought quirk limits, and an all-around increase of power behind one's quirk. Now it just so happened that Bakugo experienced all three of these changes at the same time, resulting in a punch that resonated through the room and set the couch on fire. And as another effect, blew up Midoriya's head. Upon seeing his now headless friend fall to the ground, Bakugo began to scream shrilly, slowly increasing in volume and pitch for far longer than probably reasonable until he passed out. This reaction is what we call trauma, and it is a common occurrence in children who blow up their friends' heads, an experience that is largely regarded as, well, traumatic. Inko and Mitsuki for their part stood in silence for a moment, looking at their two children before remembering that the couch was on fire and promptly attempting to put it out. In a very impressive show of stamina, Bakugo woke up screaming. He did stop, however, upon seeing Midoriya sitting at the table with a popsicle in his hand, completely fine. Although there was a layer of glitter falling off him for some reason. Can I have one? He asks rather timidly. Everyone involved in the incident promptly and without discussion agreed to forget about it. After that day, Inko decided to not tell people the specifics of Midoriya's quirk. Instead, she coached him on how to tell people about his minor strength enhancement quirk and its self-healing aspect under certain requirements. Which was all completely true, while still leaving out the fact that the certain requirements was his literal death. Bakugo knew the full truth, of course. It would be hard to forget. But nevertheless, he agreed to keep Midoriya's full quirk on the down low. As a result, he gradually stopped the snide remarks and the occasional punch he had given Midoriya before his quirk had come in. Not that he didn't try, mind you, the fact was bullying him was just no fun. He'd push Midoriya to the ground just to have him give Bakugo a look. Bakugo hated his looks. If anything, it just made him want to beat the kid up more. But he couldn't do that because then Midoriya would give him a talking to, and Bakugo hated those more than anything. Kaken, we don't hit our friends. You're not my friend, Dick. We don't call our friend dicks either. Shut up. Don't tell me what to do. I'm just worried about you, Kaken. These conversations usually ended with Bakugo gurgling incoherently in pure anger, and after a while he accepted that as much as the boy needed it, he could not simply give Midoriya a good beating now and again. Which meant that he might as well get on with his life. That did not, however, stop Midoriya from following him around like a lost puppy, which annoyed him greatly. After the appearance of his quirk, Midoriya finally began to show some spine and actually possessed a great deal of self-confidence that he had been lacking. Part of this also might have been because he was, as far as the professionals knew, effectively immortal, which, considering his dream to become a hero, was pretty dang great. Because who had ever heard of a hero who couldn't die? He was going to be the best. Honestly, most of this confidence could probably be attributed to the modified adrenaline his body was constantly pumping into him. The adrenaline also had the added effect of making him ridiculously energetic all the time. Really, it was a good thing he and Bakugo were friends. Anyone else would collapse under the constant motion of the two. Midoriya also picked up a few anxious habits because of the nature of his power. These were mainly small things like muttering constantly and tapping his feet at a near-insane pace, but he also took up a few hobbies that satiated his need to do something. His favorite of these was parkour, which he quite regularly roped Bakugo into as well, usually with a declaration of his superiority, which was clearly not something Bakugo could ignore. He also began taking lessons at a nearby dojo. This part was on Bakugo's insistence as, and I quote, "If your quirk is gonna break everything, might as well learn how to aim so you break the villain." Midoriya had nearly cried at the offer to accompany him. In truth, the lessons had done wonder for his quirk control as he learned how much power to put behind each punch and kick. He stopped breaking things as often as he learned how to regulate the force behind his movements. This does not mean that he didn't break anything ever. Far from it. Only that he was better at not shattering everything he touched for once. Even with these newly implemented lessons, Midoriya broke bones nearly every day. Unless they were major injuries, he would typically ignore them until he could get home and, as his mother was fond of saying, reset. He found that while the broken bones didn't hurt necessarily, the sensation of his limb not functioning properly and instead flopping unsettlingly wasn't a pleasant one. The feeling did not compare, however, to the inevitable disgust he felt upon inevitably killing himself. It wasn't that he minded necessarily, he always felt better afterwards, almost rejuvenated in a way, but at the same time it really was unpleasant. And yet as the years went on, he got used to the strangeness of his life and accepted his weird quirk. After all, it was better than no quirk at all. Bakugo got even angrier as they got older and began to take his frustrations out on some of the other extras, but every time he did, Midoriya would intervene. This had the effect of it becoming common knowledge that Bakugo was a demonic gremlin and Midoriya was the only ethereal being that was able to keep him in check. Which, to be fair, was accurate enough. After a few years of being subjected to Midoriya's near-constant preachings of peace, Bakugo did mellow out. Slightly. By slightly I mean that he no longer picked fights with every person that crossed his path, now he only picked fights with every person that crossed his path that deserved it. I will be the first to admit, however, that his definition of deserving was rather convoluted. But it kept Midoriya off his back for the most part, and that was what mattered. As for Inko, well, let it be known that her job was not an easy one. Not by a long shot. I am of course referring to the fact that her only son required constant care. And the nature of his quirk made it so the aforementioned care was his literal death, occasionally at the hands of Inko herself. However, this was only in the situations where it was absolutely necessary, say when Midoriya had broken not one but both arms during the day and was therefore unable to reset himself. This situation did not traumatize Inko as much as she expected it would. Oh sure, the first few times had been hell, and she had cried herself to sleep more times than she could count in the beginning, but around the 150th time he reset, it started to seem, dare I say, mundane. It was this mindset that allowed her to tolerate the layer of glitter that coated every inch of her house and the butcher knife in the bathroom cabinet. A clarification upon both of these oddities: it is no exaggeration to say the glitter was everywhere. In the sink, in the beds, over the counter. No matter how many times she washed it, their washing machine always had a handful of glitter in the lint catcher, and more often than not the vacuum cleaner was half filled with crumbs and dust and half filled with, you guessed it, glitter. As for the butcher knife, well, it wasn't their only knife kept for the sole purpose of resetting Midoriya. It was just that over the years they had realized that the mess was contained much better if the deed was done in the bath with the curtain drawn. It had become common for Midoriya to get home, go to the bathroom, and for Inko to hear the shower run as he washed the glitter down the drain. Part of her did worry that this level of desensitization was bad, but another much louder part told her to ignore the first part. As such, she told herself that it was fine because, 1, it didn't hurt him, quite the opposite in fact, as he confided that the sensation of broken bones, while it didn't hurt, was a very annoying one. And second, he always came back. These reasons were enough for her to not worry herself much with the circumstances life had given her. She did, however, still concern herself with every other aspect of Midoriya's life. Midoriya, for his part, greatly appreciated her overprotective nature. So life passed like this until before anyone knew it, Midoriya and Bakugo were entering middle school with their eyes set on being heroes. 3 years before the entrance exam. First year of middle school. Adrenaline Junkie ASHJFKCHJSJJN. Link Lord Explodo the hell? Stop sending me your nerd shit Adrenaline Junkie ITS tape All Might Bronze Age figurine fist edition. They're selling it tomorrow Lord Explodo chill. You're gonna pass out if you keep this up Adrenaline Junkie you have to come buy it with me Lord Explodo no. Adrenaline Junkie KSSHIN. PLEEEASE Lord Explodo no. Adrenaline Junkie, I'll buy you coffee Lord Explodo what time? Adrenaline Junkie, It opens at 8. The two boys met at a quaint little cafe not far from the merch store. It was a hidden gem they had found a year prior, small, but with what Bakugo described as hecking good coffee, which coming from Bakugo was equivalent to a 5-star rating and recommendation. While I cannot attest to the hecking goodness of the coffee, having never tried it myself, I will say that the cafe was very aesthetically pleasing, the wood and potted plant theme being especially well executed. And because the cafe wasn't well known it was typically very quiet and provided a peaceful atmosphere well suited for homework or cozy outings with a significant other. As such, at 7:25 on that Saturday morning, the cafe was very tranquil, its total of 5 occupants if one was to include the barista and Midoriya, who had arrived early were going about their business in the sleepy-like manner all Saturday mornings constituted. That tranquility, however, shattered the moment Bakugo walked in. He stomped over in his usual I'm better than all you extras manner and dropped heavily in the chair across from Midoriya. Midoriya for his part didn't even flinch as he finished the note he was scribbling in a notebook of his and slurped loudly at his Italian soda. Hey, Kaken. You still stalking heroes? He said without preamble. No, I'm just analyzing them. Not stalking Midoriya replied sarcastically. You can dress it up in your fancy words all you want but I know the truth. He paused as Midoriya finished up and capped his pen. They're weird as hell you know. Well I haven't been yet, but I'm fairly certain hell is a whole lot weirder than my analysis. Whatever you say, smartass, Bakugo said with an eye roll. Midoriya just chuckled at that. What's so funny? He sneered. Nothing, just laughing at the humor of the boy whose sweat smells like caramel calling me weird. At least I don't constantly smell like BO like you, Adrenaline Junkie. No, you just blow up when you're hot. Perfectly normal. While I don't cough glitter every time I use my quirk like some kinda gay Kaken, you're gay. Your point? My point is that analysis will be a good skill to have once I'm a hero. At that Midoriya stood and made his way to the counter continuing his conversation as Bakugo followed him. Even if my quirk keeps me safe it's still not great in a fight. I need to identify a villain's weakness to win. Bakugo snorted. Not great in a fight. That's one way to put it. Oh shut up. I'm getting better at controlling it. Oh you are? I wasn't aware. He then turned to the barista, large iced coffee 2 shots caramel. Please. Midoriya added. The barista, a bored teenager who looked slightly out of place in all the comfy decor, simply rolled her eyes and turned to make the drink. Care to tell me exactly how many bones you broke yesterday? Bakugo continued as Midoriya counted out money for the drink. Midoriya blushed. That doesn't count. Yesterday was an outlier and you know it. Was it 3? 4? Oh, wait. It was 27. The two sat back down at the table after grabbing Bakugo's coffee, continuing their conversation with a vigor that drew the attention of the rest of the cafe. The rest of the cafe amounted to not much, mind you. There were only 3 other patrons, a man in his late 40s and a young couple that looked to be early 20s. That meant that aside from Bakugo and Midoriya it was relatively quiet. Not that they seemed to care. It was an accident. Aizu, I saw you trip over your own feet, shatter both arms trying to catch yourself, and then proceed to fall down 3 flights of stairs. He threw up his arms. I don't know how to do that on purpose for crying out loud. How the hell did you manage to do it by accident? I'm talented like that? Your only talent is ruining my clothes with all your blood. Well, excuse me. I never asked for you to carry me home. You had bones showing. What was I supposed to do? Midoriya scoffed. My legs were fine. They were fractured in 6 different places. But not broken. At that moment a man dressed in a black shirt, a black beanie, and a black coat that he stuffed his hands in, walked in and then up to the counter. I will be frank, he looked like the definition of sketchy. Heck, the bulge in his pocket was so clearly a knife that you would have to have led a completely knife-free life to not recognize it. And since knife-free life did not describe either of them in the slightest, what with Midoriya's condition, you would think they would notice, but they were too invested in their conversation to pay him any heed. That or they just didn't care, which I cannot rule out. Your arms were dust from trying to catch yourself. Under his breath, he whispered, getting better my ass. Midoriya caught it. It's reflex, okay? It's really difficult to control all the time. It's like tiptoeing constantly. You can do it, but it's easy to forget if you're focused on something else. It was during his explanation that the sketchy man drew a knife and shook it at the barista. Money in the bag. Now. The 3 customers stared in shock, first at the robber, and then at the 2 boys who continued talking and tuned out the situation behind them. Once we get into UA, I'll be able to learn how to direct the force better. Right now all the energy is coming from breaking my bones and tendons and going everywhere. I need to learn how to dash. Ugh. Fine. I get it. The barista looked at them and rolled her eyes once more. She was surprisingly unfazed as she slowly shoveled money into the bag. I can only conclude that this calmness came from a frightening mixture of teenage angst and the laissez-faire attitude that one acquires after working in customer service for minimum wage, although I have no real proof for this. I swear we've had this conversation a dozen times dash and yet you fail to grasp the severity of my situation. The robber stared at them. Will you two shut up? Bakugo sipped his coffee, ignoring the man. There's not enough caffeine for me to deal with you today. Ha! Only a wimp would need caffeine to wake up. Not all of us are spastic junkies like you. Well, he was cut off as the robber, who having had quite enough of these 2 idiots, decided to take matters into his own hands and grabbed the back of Midoriya's collar. He yanked him out of his seat and pressed the knife to his neck. I said. Shut up. It was like a flip had switched. The 2 went from being absolutely careless to having a slight care. That care having come about only once there was a literal knife to Midoriya's throat. Midoriya screamed and reached his arm out, straining, Kaken. Bakugo's eyes blew wide. He dove wildly across the table, his fingertips almost there but just slightly too short. But at the last second his hand wrapped around the Italian soda that was teetering from the activity and threatened to spill across Midoriya's notebook. The 2 boys let out identical sighs of relief. Because yes. Of course, they were worried about the soda. They were both aware of how Midoriya was in no real danger. The notes, however? Those couldn't come back to life. This would be obvious to those who knew the 2 and Midoriya's blatant disregard for his life. However, the robber did not know the 2 and as such just watched the situation in complete and utter confusion. Which, considering the circumstances, was a reasonable reaction. Gosh darn it, you almost spilled my soda. I have a knife to your throat. Yeah, I'm well aware. The robber just sputtered bewilderedly. It took him several moments to regain his composure. You kid, he said to Bakugo. Hands in the air or your friend gets it. Oh yes please. End the bitch. Kaken. Midoriya gasped exaggeratedly in mock hurt. You wound me. That's what you get for ruining my sweatshirt. I said I was sorry. I don't think you understand. The robber pressed the knife into Midoriya's neck, cutting him off from his argument. I will kill him. He'd deserve it. The robber, an unsatisfied grocer employee when he wasn't robbing cafes, was in a state of delirious bewilderment. This was quite possibly the weirdest situation he'd ever been in, even beating the Lizard Cheerios incident of last month. What is wrong with you? Is he even your friend? You know, sometimes I wonder. Arghhh look. You are clearly incompetent. So how about you let that nerd go and turn yourself in before I blow your face off, Kakin, you better not. Midoriya spoke even against the knife, causing it to graze his neck and drip blood onto the hand of his captor. His captor, for all his many faults, was also quite squeamish at the sight of blood. This was rather unfortunate considering he was attempting to rob a small cafe with a knife. I am of the opinion that he should have tried some non-blood crimes if he had wanted money. My go-to suggestion would be embezzlement, difficult to get away with, yes, but surprisingly blood-free for those villains who may be squeamish. Regardless of what he should have done, the fact was that our hemophobic criminal was now painfully aware that there was blood in between his fingers. There was a high-pitched squeal as the robber let go of Midoriya and simply stared at the blood. He swooned, he shook, and he fainted. What? That was rather anticlimactic, Midoriya said as he coughed and rubbed at his bloody neck. Lend me your scarf, would you? Bakugo obliged, and Midoriya wrapped the material around his wound. There goes more of my wardrobe to your blood, Bakugo grumbled. We should probably call the cops, huh? Midoriya said, dodging the statement. The barista, who up until that moment had been quiet, spoke. Called them ages ago. She popped her gum. Ah. Well, that works, I guess. Midoriya said before he jerked back to face Bakugo. Crap. What time is it? He then proceeded to pull out his phone and find out for himself. No. We're late. Oh no. How tragic. Come on. Let's go, let's go, let's go. He bounced in place as Bakugo gathered up his coat. Fini. But you owe me. I bought you coffee. Yeah, and it nearly got you killed. What's new? And thus the two left, arguing all the way, leaving behind 3 confused customers, an unconscious body, and an exasperated barista attempting to explain the robbery to a pair of cops. 2 years before the entrance exam, Midoriya's front door slammed open with a vigor that seemed to shake the entire apartment complex. Midoriya, who had been in the process of putting on some red sneakers, watched as Bakugo rushed in and proceeded to shut and lock the door behind him. What did you do? Nothing. Bakugo couldn't sound more guilty if he tried. Midoriya simply crossed his arms. Aha. I may have pissed off a kid. At that moment there was the sound of something ramming against the door. The something seemed to carry a lot of weight. This is not to say that the something, whoever or whatever it may be, was fat per se, only that it was definitely on the larger side. That doesn't sound like a kid. Well. He. Sorta told his dad? There was a muffled scream from outside. I know you're in there. Come out and fight, ya brat. The voice was deep and gruff, and had there still been any doubts about the something being a child, nearly all of them were quelled upon hearing it. What did you do? Doesn't matter, Bakugo said with a wave of his hand. He deserved it. Sure he did. Midoriya bent down to finish tying his shoes. Why did you come here though? Your house was closer. He stood. Fair enough. You're welcome to hide out here if you want. I'm going to go for a jog. Wait, don't go out there, Bakugo said frantically as he grabbed the back of Midoriya's shirt. Kakin, I didn't beat up this man's kid. I'll be fine. He turned the knob. The door opened to reveal an 8-foot-5-inch tall slab of muscle blocking his way. Now I realize that some of you may struggle to imagine what this height entails, and as such, many not grasp the absolute terror such a man emits. For this reason, I will liken him to an 8-foot-tall tree, something I am sure many of you have experienced at some point in your life. As for how terrifying he was, please for a moment imagine you have a deathly fear of trees. The fear the two boys felt upon seeing the man was the same as the fear one might feel in the presence of a horrifying 8-foot-tall tree. The man's quirk caused him to have rough green skin. At the risk of sounding quirkist, I would describe him as an ogre, a Jack Shrek if you will. With horns. You can see how this would be rather unsettling, I'm sure. Especially when you take into account that from the man's expression it was clear he was unable to differentiate between the brat who beat up his son and Midoriya. The door closed. Midoriya turned on his heels. Upon further consideration, I have decided to cancel my jog. There was another loud bang on the door. Come die, you little shit. I'd rather not. Thanks. Bakugo shouted back. This garnered a ferocious growl from the man who did not seem to be a fan of Bakugo's cheek. Midoriya, upon hearing the growls, turned to Bakugo. Good golly, what did you do to tick off the Hulk? The Hulk's son actually. He clarified. Midoriya waved his arms in the air. Regardless. There is a literal giant outside my door. Yeah. That's why I'm staying here. Going out would most likely result in pain, which is something I try to avoid. Midoriya scoffed. Wimp. I regularly break bones and you don't hear me complaining. Bakugo's face lit up. What's that face for? What face? This is a normal face. Midoriya took a step back. Nope. I know that face. That's your scheming face. I don't have a scheming face. You do, and that's it. Bakugo rolled his eyes. I just had an idea, that's all. Do I want to know? Well. I can feel pain. But you can't. Bakugo grinned. Kaken, I swear he was cut off as Bakugo sprung forward, and after a moment of the two wrestling, Midoriya found himself shoved unceremoniously out the door. Even after hearing the distinct sound of the lock, he struggled with the door handle for a moment. Kaken, you jerk. I am not going to play sacrifice to your mistakes. Thanks, Aizu. Oh yeah. Bakugo's muffled voice called from inside. There was a low growl behind Midoriya. Slowly the boy turned around to face the monster of a man in front of him. Gigi, good morning, sir. I don't suppose we can talk this out? The growling got louder. Midoriya sighed. Yeah, I didn't think so. Bakugo stood near the door patiently waiting. There was the sound of a scuffle outside, yet he stayed, hands clasped together, until the noise died down. After a moment of silence, there was the sound of Midoriya banging on the door. Let me in, Kaken. Is he gone? He will be as soon as he wakes up. Bakugo unlocked the door and watched as Midoriya pushed past him, cradling a broken arm. Nice job. Now I have to go fix this. He waved the limp arm in front of Bakugo's face. Instead of going on my jog. Bakugo, however, was looking at the unconscious body outside the door. Holy shit, Aizu. You didn't have to kill him. Oh, he's fine. On the other hand. I mean, it worked, didn't it? Midoriya rolled his eyes. You owe me big time. He looked at his phone. My mom's going to be home soon, but thanks to you I will be unconscious. So I think it's only fair that you explain this mess to her. It was only a few minutes later when Inko walked in, arms laden with groceries. Hey, Auntie. Inko started, nearly dropping her bags. Oh. Katsuki. Didn't see you there. She sat the groceries on the table. How are you doing this morning? He shrugged. Inko looked around. And where's Izuku? Bakugo tilted his head towards the stairs. Resetting. Ah. She pursed her lips. Does this perhaps have anything to do with the unconscious man outside? Ah shit, he's still there? Did you get in another fight? He stopped as he looked at his friend's mother. There was no use lying to her, and Bakugo knew it. Through the years, the two boys found that while they could hide things from Inko to some extent, it was nearly impossible to get away with outright lying to her. It was this knowledge that caused Bakugo to bow his head in shame. Yeah. Are you okay? She asked, concern being her natural first reaction. Bakugo merely waved a hand and nodded. Aizu took care of it. And I assume that is why he's upstairs resetting right now? Bakugo winced. Yeah. She sighed. Just what am I going to do with you two? You could feed us. Midoriya called as we ran down the stairs fully healed. I'm starving. Izuku Midoriya. Inko crossed her arms. Did you get into another fight? Midoriya froze. It was his fault. He pointed at Bakugo, who looked incredibly offended at the totally accurate acquisition. Izuku, you can't just get into fights with grown men. I'd say he can by the looks of it, Bakugo muttered. At the same time, Midoriya complained, that's not fair. It's not like I was trying to get into a fight. Look here, she turned to Bakugo, who had lost interest and was now absent-mindedly looking at his phone. Both of you. Once she had their attention, she continued. You boys have got to tune down this reckless behavior. I can't keep coming home to finding unconscious bodies on my doorstep. You do realize that's only happened twice, Bakugo said. Which is 2 times more than most people. And Izuku. She turned to her son. You may be immortal, but that does not mean you need to be suicidal. He winced at the berating. Sorry, Mom. Her voice softened. Just please do be careful. All this action is scaring your poor mother. I don't get what's the big deal. He can't die. Bakugo said. He might not be able to die, but you can, mister. Next time I hear word of you fighting, I'm calling your mother. You can't threaten me. The old hag will just yell at me till she's not mad. He shrugged. No big deal. Inko tilted her head and grinned wickedly. Is that so? Then I don't suppose you'd mind if I told your father? Bakugo's eyes widened. You wouldn't. If I find another body on my doorstep, I won't hesitate to. Bakugo shuddered. Fine. Whatever, I guess. The truth was, Bakugo could easily weather any amount of screaming and nagging without a problem, yet as soon as anyone whose opinion he valued expressed a slight disappointment in him, Bakugo fell apart. This ended up being his father's primary means of parenting due to how effective it was. Bakugo knew that if his father were to become aware of his less than heroic behavior that day, he would be subjected to the following: a week's worth of worried expressions, a slight head shake, and perhaps even a hand on his shoulder as his father uttered a soft, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed that you've done this. Knowing this, Bakugo decided it was in his best interest to keep this situation between Auntie Inko, Midoriya, and himself. This is of course only reasonable if one does not know that Bakugo's father was well acquainted with his behavior. In fact, his father knew all too much about Bakugo's tendency to make his opinion known through his fists during arguments. Among other things, Masaru had decided long ago that his son was far too much like his mother to be much influenced by anything he could ever do. This resulted in him only pulling out the disappointed eyes for matters that truly necessitated such punishment. I myself am not totally sure if sacrificing his immortal best friend to an evil Shrek would qualify, and it seems I will never know, as Bakugo seemed quite content to meet Inko's demands of not knocking out men in front of her door again, and as such, the event was kept from Masaru. Now, if you two would help me out, I'm making soba for supper. The two boys followed Inko into the kitchen, and the unconscious man was forgotten as more pressing matters arose. Specifically, the grumbling of the two growing boys' growling stomachs. The year of the entrance exam, sludge villain Arc Bakugo heard a small tapping at his window. The hell? He then turned his attention to the clock, which read 1:47 a.m. Upon reading the time, he realized a few things. First, he had been asleep. Second, he was no longer asleep. And probably most importantly, some idiot had somehow managed to wake him up in the middle of the night by tapping on his 5th-story window. He angrily threw off his blankets and stomped to his window, where he could see the unmistakable green hair of his friend clinging to the fire escape. He opened the window and resisted the urge to cuss out the boy for waking him up so early. Instead, he settled for hissing across the distance, "What the hell are you doing?" Midoriya simply put a finger to his lips and tapped his phone. Bakugo slunk back inside and clicked on the notification. Adrenaline junkie, care to join me for some midnight parkour? Lord Explodo, Auntie's gonna kill you, adrenaline junkie. What she doesn't know won't hurt her, how about it? Lord Explodo, it's the ass crack of dawn, bastard adrenaline junkie. Aw, does Kakin need his beauty sleep? Bakugo responded with a string of middle finger emojis, which, in case you weren't aware, is the pictogram version of fuck you. Why he sent pictures rather than actually typing it out is beyond me. However, Midoriya seemed to get the message as he sent a picture of a face sticking its tongue out in response. Now while this is not the, shall I say, the conventional response to being confronted with such vulgar terminology, it was actually pretty typical for Midoriya. Lord Explodo, just this once adrenaline junkie, as he turned to dress in a more suitable outfit, he smiled to himself. The next day Midoriya was acting more energetic than typical as they walked to school. He skipped around Bakugo, jumped up and down, and generally acted like a complete oddity for the Wednesday morning. Bakugo yawned and sipped his coffee. Gosh Kaken, you look like crap. Bakugo glared at him and pointed an accusatory finger. Whose fault is that? Ah, you totally enjoyed parkouring. I'd have enjoyed it more if it wasn't on a school night. Next time we'll do it on the weekend. There won't be a next time, junkie. Whatever you say, Kaken. Midoriya teased, before running out of the way of the expected fist. He did a cartwheel while he waited for Bakugo to catch back up. Bakugo just rolled his eyes at this. Show off. Me? Never. What's got you so worked up anyway? Don't play dumb. You've been like 5x more spastic this last week. Well, you know me, adrenaline rush and all. Bakugo sighed exasperatedly. Just spill it already. Midoriya absent-mindedly scratched the back of his head. It's just all the talk about careers and the future at school got me thinking. Bakugo spun and grasped Midoriya's collar. You ain't backing out, are you? You have to become a hero so I can beat you once and for all. Chill. I'm still gonna be a hero. Oh. Bakugo dropped his friend. So then what's the problem? Well, I'm going to have to pass the UA entrance exam to get in, and as useful as this quirk is, that's gonna be tricky. So I guess I'm just worried about not being strong enough. Hence the midnight parkour. Yup. Bakugo scoffed. They'd have to be idiots to not let you in. You're gonna be a hero one way or another, just depends on whether or not we have to threaten them or not. Kaken, we can't threaten them. Why not? You got all those stalker notes, I'm sure there's some stellar blackmail material in there. That's not the point. La mame. Why even have stalker notes if you aren't gonna blackmail people? We've been through this before. I know, Bakugo said. Guess you'll just have to get stronger, huh? Yeah. Midoriya sighed. I wish there was a way I could spontaneously develop a strength quirk before the exam. Bakugo laughed. While we're dreaming, I want All Might to autograph my shirt. Like he'll ever touch that sweaty rag of yours. I'd have better clothes if you didn't get blood all over them. Wouldn't fix that sweating problem of yours. It's my quirk, you bastard. Bakugo growled at his friend and began to chase him. They ran like this all the way to the school, Bakugo shouting cusses while Midoriya laughed at him. Let's go. What's taking you so long? Bakugo complained as Midoriya packed up his books at the end of class. Go on without me, Mr. Shibata wants to talk to me. Bakugo looked up at their teacher, who was talking to a different student at the front of the class. Upon confirming he was out of earshot, he turned to whisper to Midoriya. The hell does that quirkist bastard want with you? He hissed. Though I am not typically a fan of Bakugo's colorful language, I will agree that quirkist bastard is an apt description for Shibata. He was a 35-year-old single man who had been teaching for the last 10 years of his life. All 10 had reflected poorly on his character, however, an uncle of his with power in the school board ensured his position. As for his permanent single status, it was entirely his own fault. The man seemed to value powerful quirks over any personality, unfortunate considering his quirk allowed him to change the texture of his skin, which, by all definitions, is a lame quirk. This quirkist judgment transferred over to his class and caused him to be extremely lenient to those with hero quirks, and far less gracious to those without. From this, Midoriya had pointed out several times in the past that Bakugo was seemingly immune to detention because of their teacher's poor morals. A fact Bakugo had been happy to take advantage of by regularly getting into fights, something Midoriya had chided him repeatedly for. I don't know what he wants. I swear if he gives you shit about wanting to be a hero, it's fine Kaken. I'll see you later. Bakugo ignored the invitation to leave. Midoriya was clearly anxious about the situation, knowing full well the meeting would be about his application to UA. Hey, wanna meet at my house after? We can watch that All Might movie you like so much. Bakugo wasn't the best at cheering people up, so he typically banked on the knowledge that Midoriya had an unnatural love for All Might. This line of thinking had worked well over the years and Bakugo was confident it would continue to do so for the years to come. Midoriya smiled slightly. Sure. I'll walk down after I'm done here. You sure you don't want me to wait for you? I'll be fine. With that, Bakugo turned and left and Midoriya found himself alone in the room with Mr. Shibata. He took a deep breath. See Midoriya, I called you here to discuss your future. You have here written that you want to be a hero and train at UA. The teacher held up a sheet the students had filled out a few days prior. Yup. Midoriya's foot tapped anxiously. Mr. Shibata sighed. I think it's time you start thinking less about what you want to do and more about what you can do. It's simply not practical for you to become a hero, why not? Midoriya interrupted, finding himself growing upset. Wasari? Why can't I? I'm fit enough, I have the grades, and I know I have the drive, so why can't I become a hero? Midoriya, please. He sounded exasperated. Don't make this harder than it is. Your quirk is just not fit to be a hero. I read your file, you would get one hit in before you break yourself and become completely useless. It's just not feasible. Well, then I'll have to make that one hit count. Midoriya, please be reasonable. The boy stood up. If that is all, I'll be leaving now. Midoriya. I am trying to help you here. Well, I don't need your help to become a hero, thanks. I'm doing fine on my own. You're weak. Your quirk is useless, you won't last a week. This is a perfect example of what not to say to a student when discussing their dream career. Future teachers take notes. However, Mr. Shibata is a complete and utter idiot with no regard for human emotions aside from his own, who deserves to be crushed in a trash compactor, or some equally terrible fate, such as being repeatedly awakened at 6 in the morning on Saturday by your demon spawn of a neighbor deciding to mow his lawn. But I digress. Midoriya, the poor boy, ran out of the room, bag clutched in his arms before the man could see the tears gathering in his eyes. It was only after he got a few blocks away from the school that it dawned on him, he'd just gotten into an argument with a teacher. And said teacher had told him he was useless and couldn't become a hero. That thought made Midoriya feel slightly better about yelling at him. He was walking through an underpass when he heard a sound behind him. His reasoning for taking the route had been that it would be the fastest way to get to Bakugo's house, however, he would have most likely avoided it if he had known that taking it would result in him getting suffocated by mud. The experience was an unpleasant one. Specifically, Midoriya was not thrilled at the taste of the slime slipping through his teeth. Midoriya said. I do not know what he was trying to say, but I can infer it was something along the lines of EW. Please stop forcing yourself into my mouth, or perhaps, knowing him, just a sarcastic, this day could not get better. Just when Midoriya's vision started to go black, a huge punch came out of nowhere and blew the villain apart. The punch was not an ordinary punch, mind you, you might even say it was extraordinary. This was because All Might had been the puncher and he was widely regarded as a very good puncher. I am inclined to agree with this, as the punch managed to blow the villain apart and still left Midoriya completely unscathed. Although honestly, I doubt he'd mind if he was punched by All Might, being the fanboy he is, I am of the opinion he would treasure the moment as much as any autograph. Midoriya, forgetting that there was goo in both his mouth and lungs, attempted to acknowledge the hero who had just saved him. This did not go as planned and he ended up just hacking for several minutes. All Might quickly gathered the villain into 2 large bottles and then proceeded to stand by watching as Midoriya tried his hardest to upchuck a lung. Once he managed to get himself under control, he stood shakily and uttered a breathless, "All Might." "Hello, young boy. I apologize for the disturbance. Are you alright?" "Yup." Midoriya squeaked. "Totally peachy." All Might, mistaking his fanboy panic for just panic of the "I just nearly died" variety, bent down to examine him. "Are you positive?" Midoriya nodded. "Well, if you're sure. I hate to leave so soon, but I'm afraid I'm on a rather tight schedule." He bent his knees and prepared to take off. "Wait, I wanted to ask you some at HIANNNGGG." The end of Midoriya's very rushed sentence was lost to the wind as he took to the air, hanging on All Might's leg. All Might seemed slightly disturbed at the fact that this seemingly suicidal boy was now clinging to his leg hundreds of feet in the air. He logically landed on a nearby roof. "What were you thinking?" I wanted to ask you something?" Midoriya repeated rather pathetically. "Look kid, I really need to go. Can I be a hero with a useless quirk?" I mean, it's not entirely useless. I can't feel pain, which is actually really nice. It's just that it's not really heroic or anything, and everyone tells me that hold up. Your quirk is that you can't feel pain? Among other things. That was an understatement. The immortality aspect of his quirk was perhaps the most important part. However, Midoriya was used to not explicitly talking about that, so he opted to stay silent on that bit. His omission was missed as a cloud of smoke enveloped All Might and left a stick figure in his place. "What?" Midoriya said in a mix of awe and confusion. All Might sighed. "I have something to tell you." What followed was a long-winded explanation that involved losing organs, a time limit, and holding one's abs while swimming. Midoriya wasn't entirely sure he understood the analogy, but the rest made sense enough. "That being said, I'd appreciate it if you don't tell anyone else about this." All Might finished. "All right. You don't seem very surprised about all this." "Yeah, well, my quirk's weird too." "A quirk that makes you spit blood and turn into a scarecrow when you use it doesn't seem that far-fetched." "Oh. I suppose so." All Might seem to have never thought of it that way. About me being a hero with a lame quirk?" Midoriya prodded. "Ah yes, that." All Might tilted his head and thought. "You can't." "What?" "If you want to save people, become a police officer or something. Being a hero is far too dangerous. Look at me." He chuckled. "Seriously though, you can get really hurt." "I can't feel pain though." "That's literally my quirk." Midoriya pleaded. "There's even a self-healing aspect, so I won't even be out of commission for long. Even still, villains don't aim to injure." His voice lowered ominously. "They aim to kill." All Might opened a door that led to a stairwell. "Regardless of your quirk, there's no way to come back from the dead. Sorry kid, but you need more than passion to become a hero." Midoriya was left stunned and sputtering on the rooftop. Even his hero didn't believe in him. And yet, that didn't really change anything. Midoriya had been having his doubts that day, what with the argument with Mr. Shibata, and asking All Might. Well, he had hoped it would be a confirmation. A confirmation that he could be a hero, regardless of what people said. But that wasn't the way it went. But still, what was it he had said? Regardless of your quirk, there's no way to come back from the dead. Midoriya laughed out loud, the noise bubbling out of him in relief. "And that's where you're wrong," he said aloud. He knew he could, knew he would, become a hero. Bakugo was simply making his way from school to his home when the universe decided he should be eaten by a slime. Bakugo was not a fan of this decision, something he made very clear by him screaming loudly in anger and attempting to blow up the villain. This did not cause the villain to let him go, but it did succeed in drawing a crowd who called in the heroes. Although typically that would be a good thing, the heroes that came were very clearly not fit for the situation and honestly probably should have stayed at their agencies and waited for a crime that was more suited to their specific talents. All this meant that there were multiple witnesses, much to his embarrassment, as Bakugo unsuccessfully exploded. Internally, Bakugo was blaming Midoriya for this situation. He had no reason to do this, albeit that he always internally blamed someone for all his problems, and it was simply a coincidence that this was slightly Midoriya's fault. I say that quite loosely. It was only his fault in that he had accidentally caused All Might to drop the villain while he clung to his leg. Mostly it was the villain himself who was to blame. Really, Bakugo should be blaming the sludge villain for attacking him, not Midoriya for causing him to be in the area he was when he got attacked. Which was kind of funny if you think about it. He was subconsciously blaming his friend, who was sort of at fault, but not for the reason he thought. But I am getting sidetracked when really I should be covering the fact that Bakugo was quite literally dying. Luckily, before he snuffed it, he caught sight of a familiar bag soaring through the air and into the villain. Unfortunately, because at that moment Bakugo himself was in the villain, the bag also hit his face. MMMGRHM. Let go of him. Midoriya yelled. You again? Fucking brat. The villain hissed. I'll kill you. I'd like to see you try. You can't kill a fly. Midoriya taunted. He figured that if he could get the villain to attack him, Bakugo would be able to run free. He was ridiculously surprised when that was what actually happened. I'll show you, twerp. And with that, Midoriya was once again eating mud. The experience caused him to swear off all jello for the remainder of his days, sure that the texture would cause him to barf. The feeling was so unpleasant he found himself wishing he'd just die, as once dead he would not be able to taste. Also because while not painful, the experience of suffocating was not enjoyable. His wish was granted in a timely manner, and only moments before All Might came careening through the sky to deliver a literal weather-changing punch that scattered the villain all across town. This left Bakugo in the awkward situation of trying to hide his friend's corpse from the heroes. He did an admirable job, managing to drag him down an alleyway while everyone was focused on the sudden arrival of All Might. It truly was a testament to the love of All Might that the two boys escaped without being seen, or perhaps just a testament to shoddy writing. Midoriya awoke to a slap across the face. Hi, Kaken. He coughed, having inhaled some glitter. Well then. I suppose I can check suffocation off my suicide bucket list. Bakugo chose to ignore that last little bit. Sure, took your sweet time. My bad, I'll try to resurrect myself faster next time. You better. Now let's get out of here. I bet all the heroes are trying to find us. They don't know where we are? It was that, or I explained to the officer how, my friend isn't dead, he's just sleeping. Bakugo raised an eyebrow at Midoriya. Can't see that going over so well. Alright, fair enough. Midoriya stood and brushed the glitter off his jeans. With a skip and a hop he jumped onto a dumpster and jumped once more to grasp the bottom of a fire escape, which he proceeded to climb like some freak hybrid of a monkey and a spider. Now that I think about it, he could just be compared to a normal spider monkey, a very real thing I try to avoid thinking about most of the time. Well. You coming or not? He called down once he reached the top of the building. Bakugo rolled his eyes. You're so extra, you know that, right? He said before moving to follow in his friend's lead. That's why you love me. The two had slowed their pace once they neared Bakugo's house and stopped for a moment on a rooftop not far from his apartment complex to catch their breath. So? We still on for that movie? Aizu. I almost died. Midoriya rolled his eyes. Clearly you're not trying hard enough. I did. You always die. I am pretty impressive like that, aren't I? Bakugo snorted. You have a way of making traumatic situations seem pretty ordinary. At that moment a man crashed down in front of them, having just flown through the sky to land on the roof. The man was All Might, of course, just barely holding onto his form. I am here. To talk to you. All Might? The boys exclaimed at the same time. How did you get away from the reporters? Midoriya asked. Not a problem for me. Besides, they were quite distracted looking for you too. All Might shook a finger at them. Naughty, naughty, all that sneaking around had the heroes worried. There was a veil of smoke starting to pour from his body. But enough of that, I wanted to speak to you, Midoriya. Okay. He made no move to leave. Alone, please. I'll just tell Kakin whatever you tell me. What? Couldn't you dash All Might transformed? Well shit. He sighed. Bakugo exclaimed. It took several minutes to get Bakugo caught up on the whole situation. Sue. Is this, like, a well-known thing? Not in the slightest. In fact, aside from a handful of close friends, you two are the only ones that know. Wow. You kinda suck at keeping this a secret. Bakugo said, unamused. All Might simply coughed a bit of blood in way of a response. Anyways, what did you want to tell Izuku? Are you sure I can't convince you to leave? Not a chance, Bakugo said, crossing his arms. All Might sighed. Well, in that case, let me tell you too about a little thing called One for All. And you want me to inherit this quirk? That is the plan, yes. Are you sure you want to do this? I told you, my quirk is really not suited for being a hero. And I mean, you don't really know me that well. We only had like one conversation and it was kinda rushed. Almost like the whole conversation was being written by an author who just really wanted to get to the next scene and was banking on the fact that most of the readers knew the extent of the situation already. This is in fact exactly what happened. However, Bakugo and All Might chose to ignore this insight as neither of them had a good grasp on the concept of the fourth wall. He'll do it. Bakugo interrupted the insistent mutterings. Midoriya snapped out of his mutter trance to elbow Bakugo. Hey! That's not exactly your choice to make. You better take it. This on top of your shitty quirk will guarantee that you'll make it into the hero course. Bakugo pounded a fist into his hand. Then when I beat you, I'll prove to everyone that I'm the best. Ah, of course, you have an ulterior motive. Midoriya rolled his eyes. All Might coughed. He does have a valid point, what do you say? Yes. Of course. This is like a dream come true. I'd love to take on your quirk if you're sure about this, that is. Believe me when I say that I think you will be perfect. Still not totally sure why you think so. Midoriya muttered. All Might ignored him. You will, however, have to train your body to be able to take the strength that comes with One for All. If you don't, then your limbs could potentially explode. He chuckled. You can see how that would be a problem, I'm sure. Now had All Might fully understood Midoriya's quirk, he would have realized that this was actually not much of a problem. The two boys had made this connection and did not laugh at the joke. You didn't tell him? Bakugo glared at Midoriya, who in turn threw his hands in the air. Well, I didn't know he was going to make me his freaking successor. It's always been a secret, why would I tell him? I dunno, 'cause he's your idol? You have to tell him now. Shut up. I was going to. All Might seemed at a loss for words. What? We need a minute, Bakugo said with finality as he grabbed Midoriya's wrist and dragged him a few paces away. Hey! Midoriya shouted. So let me get this straight. Bakugo hissed, his back to All Might. Some guy who claims to be All Might is offering to make you his successor on the basis that you're more suicidal than pig taunting a tiger. The heck is that analogy? Shut up. The point stands. While I'm fairly certain he is All Might, I don't know many other people who can make it rain from a single punch. He could be, like, a shapeshifter pretending to be All Might, and the real All Might is still with the reporters or something. Midoriya simply stared at Bakugo in response. Or something like that. Bakugo finished lamely. Okay, so I seriously doubt that's the case. Well, the only other option is that the number one fucking hero wants to give you his quirk. You. So sorry if I find it hard to believe that anyone would want you as a student. He crossed his arms. I don't understand. You seemed really eager for me to get his quirk a few minutes ago. Yeah, well, that was before I learned that he didn't know about your quirk, 'Cause that means he looked at you recklessly throwing yourself into dangerous situations and thought, this kid would make a great successor. And that's just stupid. Midoriya opened his mouth to argue. Midoriya closed it and thought about Bakugo's words. Point. Sides, he said, it makes you explode? Come on Izuku, do you really need more ways to break yourself? Like you're one to talk, Mr. Explodo. Bakugo rolled his eyes. Regardless. You are going to tell him? Yeah. But first, Midoriya looked at Bakugo, all humor gone from his face. Do you really think I should do this? You fucking better. This is the chance of a lifetime, nerd. Midoriya smiled. And you're going to need all the help you can get if you keep getting into trouble. You sound like my mother, Midoriya grumbled. And I don't get into that much trouble. We both know that's a major lie. Bakugo turned around and walked back to All Might. Midoriya followed suit. Alright Junkie, tell him. Midoriya took a deep breath. All Might, I have something I need to tell you. Okay? So? My quirk. It's weird? I'm not totally sure how to explain this. Bakugo growled. Just show him, idiot. Show me what? All Might questioned, growing more confused by the second. I can't do that. Why the hell not? 'Cause it's Midoriya struggled to explain himself. It's disturbing. Bakugo rolled his eyes. Get over it. You'll have to show him at some point if you take him up on his offer. Fine. Midoriya slung his bag off his shoulder and pointed at Bakugo. But you're gonna have to explain it to him. I don't understand? What are you doing, Midoriya? All Might questioned. You see, All Might was used to being at least a little confused most of the time. This was because for all extents and purposes he was not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree and as such rarely understood what was happening. Mostly he just waited for people to scream and then punched stuff. Somehow this method had ended up working out pretty good for him thus far and even resulted in him becoming the #1 hero. However, this situation had him more confused than ever. Sure, he had chosen a successor on the basis that Midoriya seemed to be hero material, a conclusion he had come to upon seeing the boy throw himself into a very dangerous situation, but the two boys were making him feel incredibly out of the loop. Sorry for lying to you, All Might, but this is my quirk. And with that Midoriya took a deep breath before running the short length of the roof and jumping. To elaborate, he quite literally swan dived off the roof headfirst in an impressive display of athleticism and a complete disregard for personal safety. All Might for his part stood completely still, refusing to believe that anyone was that, well, suicidal. He quite honestly believed that Midoriya was going to fly or demonstrate something equally epic as his true quirk. Don't blame him for thinking so, he had very little context for the situation, and as such the boy flying seemed reasonable enough. As it was, Midoriya did not fly, instead, he fell the length of the building and landed with a grotesque squelch on the pavement. That bastard. Bakugo glared angrily at the edge. All Might's jaw moved up and down but no noise came out. Bakugo turned to the man. All Might, sir? So, don't panic, but is he dead? Well, Bakugo seemed to be a bit panicky himself, I mean, kinda? He'll be fine. But he's dead. Yeah. He's dead. But shit. All Might then turned and ran away. Wait, All Might, you don't understand. Bakugo chased after the hero. Bakugo finally caught up to the hero, who had stopped running after his curiosity got the better of him to stare at Midoriya's deformed corpse. The boy's blood had gathered around his body and was already starting to shimmer. The two stood in silence for a minute before All Might finally broke it. I'm concerned, he said. Yeah, well, everything considered, that's a fair reaction. He's really dead, All Might said, still in shock. I tried to tell you, Bakugo examined the body. It's his quirk. Dying is his quirk? Kinda? All Might just stared at Bakugo. Ugh. I'm really not good at explaining this. No. No, you are not. Bakugo glared at All Might, annoyed at this reaction. I don't think that's really fair to the hero. He simply lacked the background knowledge to truly comprehend the situation, and Bakugo was frankly not helping. Look. He's immortal. He dies and then he gets his shitty glitter everywhere and boom. Not dead. What does that even mean? It means the asshole knew I'd be terrible at explaining this and wanted me to suffer. You know, somehow I doubt that was his intention. That was definitely his intention. He just likes to see me fail. Will you please just explain what's happening? At that moment Midoriya did indeed explode in a cloud of glitter. I'm back. All Might screeched. Sorry for keeping that from you, All Might, Midoriya said as he stood. But there you go. I'm also immortal. Which is kinda useful. I'm sorry, you're what? Kaken. Did you not explain my quirk to him? There was a teasing undertone to his words that lent credence to Bakugo's theory. Bakugo flipped Midoriya the bird. Explain your own quirk, idiot. Finn. He turned to the thoroughly confused hero. So? My quirk is called Adrenaline Rush. Basically my body pumps modified adrenaline into my system 24/7. It makes me have a constant adrenaline rush and also activates my body's hysterical strength mechanism. So that means that I go over my limits in strength, but it has the side effect of breaking me cause my body isn't meant to take the strain. I don't mean to be rude, but can we please get to the immortal part? Oh. Yeah, that's probably important. He cleared his throat. As a safety, since my quirk is so volatile, there's also a healing aspect. That is, only activated after my heart stops. So? Yeah. There is a silence broken only by an awkward cough from Bakugo. All Might took a deep breath. Kid. Why did you not think to tell me this? I just did. All Might said nothing. Midoriya sighed. I dunno. I guess since I just don't really tell people, it didn't exactly occur to me. And why do you not tell people? I for one would have greatly appreciated a warning. I have a few reasons. Also, Midoriya winced. It does tend to cause, trauma. Ah. That would be a valid reason. All Might sighed and shook his head. You're going to be a handful of a successor, aren't you? Wait. You still want me to inherit your quirk? If anything, the knowledge of your true quirk has only reaffirmed my thoughts that you should. After all, being immortal will probably be very helpful. Okay, but why do you want me to take your quirk? Don't argue with him, dumbass. Bakugo interjected. Just take the damn quirk. Okay. He turned to the hero. All Might, sir, I would love to take on your quirk. They stood in awkward silence for a few minutes as Midoriya looked at the hero expectantly. Right now? All Might said. Was that not what you meant? Well, originally I had planned on having you train your body before so that you wouldn't explode. Been there, done that, he's fine, Bakugo interjected. Now give him the quirk. Wah don't ask, Midoriya said exasperatedly. He has a point though. That he does. Suddenly he transformed back into his All Might form and pulled a hair out of his head. Eat this. What? You need my DNA to get my quirk. Okay, but like, your hair? Midoriya put a hand to his mouth and began to mutter. Only the follicles at the bottom actually contain DNA, so I really should only need to eat that end, but that's still kinda ineffective. Maybe if I just licked your arm? Cause then I'd be digesting hundreds of your dead skin cells and those would also have DNA. All Might struggled to keep up with the relentless flow. Do you want to lick me? I not particularly. He waved his arms. But I would if I needed to. Bakugo groaned. Just eat the damn thing already. Okay. I was going to. And with that Midoriya grabbed the hair and devoured it. He made a face as he swallowed. Is that it? All Might nodded. You should begin feeling the effects very soon. As soon as he said that, Midoriya doubled over. Oh. What's wrong? Are you okay? All Might asked worriedly. He bent closer to the boy. Get back, I think I am gonna dash. I have no doubt that the next word was going to be explode, but the sentence was cut off by Midoriya exploding, so I am unable to confirm this. Bakugo let out a high-pitched screech of anger as blood splattered his shirt. Okay, so I guess you were right about the whole exploding thing, Midoriya said as soon as he revived. Bakugo furiously slapped at the glitter down his front. You think? All Might blinked hard. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. You say that until it happens like 100 times, Bakugo glared at his shirt as if willing the glitter out. It did not work. Then it's just annoying. So exploding wasn't fun, but I think I have a better handle on it now, Midoriya said as if that was a normal sentence. What next? Well, All Might started, at a loss for this strange situation he now found himself in. 'Cause I was thinking I might need to change my quirk description now that I have one for all too. What, you finally going to add that makes owner of quirk act like a fucking squirrel with no regards for personal safety to the description? Bakugo snorted. Ha ha. But really. The official description says I have a very minor strength enhancement, which is obviously no longer true. Well. All Might started hesitantly. You are able to change those when necessary. If I may offer my opinion? Midoriya nodded. We can't have people knowing about one for all, but if you edited your quirk as if you had just discovered more about it, then it should be fine. So you're saying I should change my quirk description to be like a combination of adrenaline rush and one for all? Exactly. I was thinking you could maybe name it after the small strength aspect of your existing quirk. Midoriya's eyes brightened. Hysterical strength. Bakugo laughed sharply. Well, you're hysterical enough, that's for sure. All Might smiled. Midoriya Izuku, today you become the 9th holder of One for All, or as it will be known as from this day forward, hysterical. They decided to meet the next day at Takoba Beach to start Midoriya's training. What time we gonna meet? Bakugo questioned. Are you coming too, young Bakugo? All Might questioned, slightly confused. Bakugo scoffed. Of course I'm coming. You think I'm going to let this idiot get ahead of me by having extra training? Hell no. I'm coming too, he tilted his head in thought. Also, you're probably gonna need my help. It's harder than you'd think keeping this dumbass from killing himself. Midoriya rolled his eyes. I'm fine. No need to baby me. Trust me, you'll be grateful that I'm coming by the end. All Might was. By the time they had finished with Midoriya's first day of training, he had died no less than 17 times, which was 17 more times than All Might had expected. Although to be fair, that was probably his own mistake considering Midoriya had died 3 times the day prior, but I digress. It seemed that there was a slight problem with One for All that caused Midoriya to be unable to use it at less than 100%, and that meant he was constantly exploding himself. Although he hadn't believed Bakugo at the time, All Might was starting to feel a little desensitized to the constant death. Midoriya. All Might said as the boy woke up for the 17th time that day. I'm beginning to think we need a new approach. Bakugo snorted. You think? Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I don't seem to be getting much more control of this quirk. What do you suggest? Well, originally, I was going to have you train your body to become a better vessel for One for All. Perhaps we should go back to that? In the end, it was decided that All Might would continue to train Midoriya by helping him to strengthen his body. And Bakugo, not being one to relax, decided that he too would prepare for the upcoming entrance exam by pushing his body to the limits. Thus the two boys each worked hard for the next many months in hopes of achieving the same goal, being accepted into UA's hero course and becoming the best possible heroes. Now, if you are so inclined, I would urge you to imagine a particularly powerful training montage in which you may see Midoriya clearing the beach with All Might, lifting weights as he studies for the exam, and perhaps most importantly, attempting to not use 100% of his power 100% of the time. This was much easier said than done considering the boy was now in the possession of not one, but two quirks that seemed to only allow him to go over his body's limits and evidently would not allow him to settle for anything less. Despite this, he managed to get to the point where he could use 5% of one for all with minimum repercussions. This was also due to the fact that he had quite a bit of prior experience with limiting his strength and as such was confident that he would get a handle on the two quirks during his time at UA. If you are to continue this fictitious montage, you may see Bakugo, who has also thrown himself completely into training. Not only training his body but also paying particular attention to his quirk which, although not similar to Midoriya's in most ways, also put quite a strain on him due to its, shall I say, explosive nature. As if this wasn't enough, he had also decided that it would be in his best interest to study for the written exam. That would conclude the training montage that I do hope you have imagined in far greater detail than my words could ever express. My reasoning for having you imagine this scene is that I quite frankly do not have the energy to describe it for you. Although I am beginning to realize that to some extent I have done just that. Alas, this would lead us to the day of the entrance exam where Bakugo and Midoriya were walking towards UA, predictably arguing. All I'm saying is that depending on the hero, their personality can actually increase civilian approval. It's not enough to be efficient. As a hero you have to make sure to garner the support of the general public. Take Endeavor for example. His cold demeanor has a certain type of appeal for some fans, but only because the persona is well crafted and all-encompassing. If he were to start acting more aloof and out of character his ratings would plummet, but since I cannot believe you just compared me to that shitstain. Bakugo glared at Midoriya. Yeah well, that shitstain has more popularity than you ever will with that flaming pile of trash you call a personality. I don't need a personality. I have bombs for hands. Oh my goodness. I can't. Midoriya rolled his eyes and threw his hands in the air, exasperated. Look, you want to be number one? I can't wait to see how well that will go. Oh dash, it was at that moment that Midoriya found himself falling, having tripped over either his own 2 feet or perhaps something invisible that lay on the ground. Most likely his own feet. Midoriya had, like most people, tripped many times in his life. However, in his case, it was slightly different, as if he was to catch himself it would most likely result in shattering his arms. He knew this and, not wanting to go to the exam with 2 broken arms, acted accordingly, closing his eyes and bracing for impact but kept his hands at his side. This of course meant that he slammed into the ground with enough force to give him a bloody nose, the sight of which caused Bakugo to laugh. Not even a second after he decided to become acquainted with the cement he felt a slap to the back. This was odd considering that Midoriya was fairly certain he hadn't slapped himself on the back and Bakugo was still doubled over laughing at his predicament. It was strange, although Midoriya was sure that he had been lying on the pavement only moments before, he now seemed to be pinwheeling through the air completely weightless. His vision was rather blurry from the spinning, but he thought he saw a girl around his age flailing her arms and Bakugo wheezing next to her. "Whoa," was all Midoriya said. "Oh no, I am so sorry," the girl said. "I saw you falling and I tried to catch you, but I guess I was too late. Oh, I should probably put you down. I'm so sorry." She rambled without taking a single breath before touching her fingers together. Weight returned to Midoriya and he fell on his head on the floor. "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry." "Wow." Midoriya scrambled back to his feet, unfazed. "Is that your quirk? That's so neat. 5-point contact, right? Can you make anything weightless, or does the size matter? How long can you hold it? Can you make yourself weightless?" "Chill, Aizu, you look like a complete maniac, you're scaring the poor girl." Bakugo rolled his eyes. Midoriya took a second to realize that there was still blood trickling down his face and had bombarded this stranger with intense questions about her quirk. "Oops," he said. Don't worry. I'm totally fine." The girl looked on the verge of crying. "You're bleeding." "Oh. Yeah well, not a big deal. I'm so embarrassed." She buried her face in her hands. "I'm just going to run away now." She then proceeded to do just that, racing into the building without a second glance. "Wow. Quite the charmer, aren't you?" Bakugo said sarcastically. "Hey. It wasn't that bad." "It was. And what about you? You just stood around laughing at me." Bakugo dug through his bag and tossed a handkerchief to Midoriya. You would too if you had seen it. You looked hilarious. Rude. Midoriya took the handkerchief and tried his best to wipe the blood off his face. Oh, give it here, Bakugo said, roughly taking it from him. You're just smearing it all over. Bakugo dabbed at Midoriya, who squirmed. Just leave it. We're gonna be late for the exam. You are not going to the exams with blood on your face. What kind of impression would that leave? Approximately 18 feet away, Koji Koda, a UA hopeful, stood watching the entire exchange. Because he had seen the whole situation, he decided to change that 18 feet into 33 as he made a very wide circle around the strange children. He shuddered and decided he very much did not want to associate with Bakugo and Midoriya. Which, in my opinion, was probably smart. This is the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any recommendations, leave it in the comments, and thank you to Last Dreamer for telling me about this.